We will have our first panel where we will deal with the potential of financial institutions of development in the transformation from plans into actions for sustainable development. And the objective is to discuss the central role of these actors to reach the 2030 agenda objectives in our country. Our guests will debate experiences learned that can orient and reinforce the action of the national development system in the ABDE Sustainable Development Plan. Let's continue with this debate. We would like to invite to our stage here Subsecretary of Finance and Development, some Sustainable Development from the Ministry of Economy, Mr. Ivan Oliveira. I'd also like to invite Professor from McMaster University, Mr. Thomas Marois. We'd also to call the coordinator of the FiBraS program from GIZ, Mr. Gustavo Ribeiro. Also, the Executive Director for Sustainability from Caixa, Mr. Jean Benevides. Also like to invite the Regional Aide for the Global Fund for Cities Development, Mrs. Gabriella Costa Ferreira, who will make the comments. Perfect. So now let's hear for the initial speech, Mrs. Gabriella Costa Ferreira. Good morning to all. Thank you very much. My name is Gabriella Costa Ferreira. I'm the Regional Aide for the Global Fund for Cities Development. It's a great honor to be representing Mr. Freitas, which couldn't be here. So in his name, I would like to thank immensely the invitation by ABDE to be in this forum for the second time. I would like to thank also President Celso Fonseca from our focal points, from CASIA and all of the team, to congratulate you for this event that is already a success. The mobilization of all the partners with a high level of mobilization and also high level of the themes that will be dealt in these 2 days of forum. Firstly, I would like to say, so the NDFS, it's created over 10 years ago, specifically for subnational investment to channel the financial flows to the local level. We were born from this prerogative that the international agenda would get to the front. We need to have a dialogue, a well-established dialogue between local actors, municipalities, small and medium companies, and the financial actors. And we were born from this prerogative of answering this bottleneck as intermediators, and these two sides, the two ends of the local financing. Within our experience dealing with various actors, be they on the political side, dealing with national governments, international organization, regional governments, local governments, and on the financial end, dealing with banks, multilateral banks, regional banks, bilateral banks, national and regional and subnational banks. So we've noticed the importance of these subnational banks that are well represented here in Brazil by the NDFS and the ABDE, and creating this bridge in order to capillarize the lines, the international funds, and even the national to the local level. So in this perspective, for 2 years, we've created an alliance of the national banks for the Latin American and Caribbean together with and others, and now we count with over 20 members. This dynamic was created with the common financing, which is a forum with over 500 public banks, and they will be in Cartagena, Colombia. And the idea of this alliance is to reinforce the role of the subnational banks in this financial line in order that they might reach the front end, reinforce their role in the international arena, how to train them, and also to make this bridge with the projects at the local level. We've observed an opportunity, even in the work of the ABDE. They have done a great work of aligning the investment portfolios with the international agendas, and now we are ready to launch into action, and it's a great opportunity of starting this panel with this such hands-on theme and on these 2 days of dialogue here in this event, and to show the intent of this event. And I think this will bring important reflections so that we can continue in this pragmatic perspective. So without further ado, if you want to send questions at the end, if you're taking notes, we will have first interventions of our 3 panelists, and then we will open for questions. So to start our dialogue, I would like to invite Mr. Oliveira, Subsecretary for Sustainable Development, to share a little bit of his perspectives of his experience in the Finance Ministry as regards the strategies of the government to increase the volume of business, of finance, and what would be the role of this national development system as a financial branch in giving a catalyst to these strategies, especially the ecological plan, let's say. You have the floor. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be in this event of the ABDE that's so important for our country. I will bring a bit of what we've done, especially in the international area, in the Ministry of Finance. Some of the challenges we have at the national level, be it direct financing to programs and projects, but also to bring how this is important for Brazil in this current situation, where Brazil is preparing to take over the G20 in December, and where sustainable development is one of the priorities in the G20 to deliver what President Lula has said, that we have to deal with this inequality and this financing of the transition of the process. And in that sense, I'd like to congratulate the ABD for bringing the SDGs, a central aspect of this here. And something I've seen, especially in the international arena, in some of the reforms, the World Bank is going through the main reforms of its history, even though it's not very publicized, the World Development Map. This will have an impact in other multilateral, so will have impact as well for us as clients, but also owners of their bank, or at least our small part, and the connection with the financiers. So the critical point is a counterpoint between climate and development. So what we try to do in the Ministry of Finance, you cannot think about climate without thinking of development, and only talk about climate like in Brazil, and not only mitigation and CO2 when you have to face critical social problems from previous centuries and that we have in various countries like ours. A critical point here, and bring the SDGs helps to equate. Climate is one of the SDGs, is a constellation of problems that we have to solve. Not only it, of course, it's critical for the existence of humanity on Earth, but it has to be connected with the needs of the location of each country and their needs. So that's the first important point. SDGs are important, but even more important that we can do this connection between the social, the environmental, the social and the climate as being central to the development agenda of the country. I was seeing the opening panel, and it's important to highlight some of the plans that government has already launched that give the directives of where we will go through the next years. We have a PACs that are connected to the sustainability and climate in general. We have a new PPA that connects sustainability and SDGs. We have an ecological transition plan launched by the minister when the PACs were announced. That will be more detailed, but will cover a whole agenda of the government for this transition with full sectors and focus and attention. All of the part of financing of projects will be critical, and critical partnership with ABDE, with our development. And then we have a new industrialization agenda, which is critical, and I would say ABDE is even more important for that. For a series of projects and programs, it's way easier to get finance from abroad, where there's more appetite to keep forests standing up, or even in some other projects that there are international funds that were created, even in specific climate action for the reduction of CO2. Brazil, in this same scenario, in June, we were a climate investment funds, and first time approved in Brazil, and we approved a $70 million program. It involves two programs coordinated by World Bank and the IDB for the investment in renewable energy in Brazil. So there are small focuses where the international resources get in a direct and easier way. But for the industry and the transformation of industry and the new industrialization, we need national resources. Of course, countries tend to cooperate, but there is an agenda of competition. If we want to advance and, in fact, reposition our industry in this context, domestic financing is essential, and this has been a central part of the process. Our PAC makes this very clear in how much we need public and private investments, more national, with new mechanism, new scripts so that we might finance projects. Once more, this national development finance system is critical. There are some areas where the private will never get if the public sector doesn't go ahead in order to make the investment that creates the opportunities, that calibrates the risk, and generates the benefits and brings more investments, and making an important scaling of projects, new technologies. So this is a central point. So from one, you have this dichotomy between climate and development, which we try to connect. Sustainability is the name for that, and the other is for external finance. I think domestic is critical, though, and the partnership of the BNDES and other banks is absolutely important. Of course that the international is important. I'd like to highlight in my last minutes the agenda that we've been doing with the G20, and Brazil will be in the presidency of the G20 in December, and something we're talking about, there are two tracks. There's one for Sherpas and one for finances. And the finance is the Ministry of Finance, and the other one by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we seek within the G20 to think about mechanisms to amplify sustainables projects and to leverage private financing. And we're working a bit. There are two critical points. we haven't talked to the private sector. If you want to leverage the private sector, and within the group, we don't know how the G20 could give impulse to this connection with the private sector. So what we want to do is bring a little bit of the private sector. What are the limits? What are the risks? As an economist, I can say that. But other thing, of those that are operating, what are the bottlenecks so that the G20 can build any useful. And another critical point of this specific is the connection between the private and the public. What we want to do in our presidency is a pool of public resources from the developed countries on the vertical green funds, like the Green Climate Fund, Climate Investment Fund, Global Environmental Facility, Adaptation Fund, that are very hard to get access. For you to have an idea, the BNDES is one of those accredited to the Green Climate Fund, and we have great difficulty in operating with the GCF. If the BNDES that has the expertise, imagine the rest of our system. So an agenda we want to put as critical, and it connects to the international agenda and is very important to us, to ease the access of the developing countries to these funds. We want that project in the interior of Bahia, Piauí, or Rio Grande do Sul, of a regional bank might get credit, important concessionary credit, partially donations from these climate funds to make up a mix, a blended finances of concessional, more resources, and some private banks. And she will say that these public funds, that we can generate an impact because these are too hard to access. This connects directly to the domestic agenda. We have various plans, and we will need resources for that. It's a great pocket, but it's a pocket we have to use very strategically in order to connect to these resources. The solidarity and with the connection with these countries in development. Imagine here in Brazil, if the BNDES has difficulty, imagine to someone in the Marshall Islands or some other places. So to make this easier access to the funds and the resources that come from that, according to the needs of each of the development countries, we need it maybe for a certain type of profile of project. Some areas we have good domestic private resources, so this might need some concessions, but there are many others in terms of biodiversity in the Amazon. If we don't have a heavy concessional credit and donations, we will not be able to operate. So this connection with these countries in development, and Brazil as a leader of an agenda of a transition between the countries, is very dear to us. And I understand through this agenda that we're building in the G20, we'll have the possibility of making useful deliveries to our domestic agenda that are relevant, but also, more importantly, to help other countries in development in their process of transition and transformation. And I know my time is over. Just one final point. You would talk about the fix, the Ministry of Finance, IDB, and others. We set up a panel in Cartagena next week for sustainable development. And we'll have this common summit where most of the banks, multilateral banks, binational, will be over there. And we want to take a little bit about this message, the main topics we want to have on G20 on sustainable development, and hear it from these relevant stakeholders. It's a moment for us to collect a little bit about the problems, those that operate. Once more, in the financial track, we want to beat financial solutions. G20 connected to reality. not only with strategic debates or very shallow deliveries. We want to connect to our domestic needs, but also with solutions for countries in development, especially in this area of sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Your comments were very, very important. And so the fix, it has this mandate this year to focus the debate more on the blended financing, because we need many, many resources so that we're going to be able to achieve this 2030 agenda. Now, continuing our panel, I would like to invite Mr. Thomas Marois. Thomas. He is a political economy professor at McMaster University, and he's present online. And so please share with us all of your perspectives regarding the role of public credit in the funding this transition, and for beyond that, what would be the possible opportunities so that we can have a cooperation between the public and the private sector so that we can fund the transition to the low carbon economy? Thank you very much. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And thank you to the ABDE for the generous invitation. My apologies for not being in person, but I've, like many in the room, are on my way to the Financing Commons in Cartagena. And so it'd be a bit too much travel back and forth to Canada and to South America. There are a couple of things I want to speak to today in terms of the topic of turning plans into action in the role of development finance institutions. And I'm going to bring a global view to this discussion. I don't presume to be an expert on Brazil, but I think there are many lessons that Brazil can share with the world. And then there are some lessons to the world that we also need to learn in terms of reaching the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and doing those in the time needed. I want to make an important key point. There's a couple of key points I'll make in my intervention. One is that, frankly, there is no pathway to a sustainable future that will not pass through public financial institutions. And this might be well understood in Brazil, but elsewhere around the world, this is a rather novel idea. But at the same time, we have to raise the question of whether this financing of green transitions will be just. And I think that remains an open question that we need to answer. The green transition will get financed, but will that finance enhance equity, and will that promote social justice? And in this, I think we need to be a bit more skeptical and ask a few more questions around the billions to trillions agenda, around, in many ways, I think, a disproportionate focus on the necessity to leverage private finance. Private finance will be involved, but what I want to make a point today is that much of the sort of advancements in the financing of green transitions are coming through innovative public projects. And in that way, there's also an opportunity to ensure that the green transition is also just. And so we're really in the agenda of financing the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. There's an already existing, viable alternative, and that's really the world of public banks. Just to, give a sense to the audience that when you add up, all the institutions, public banking institutions around the world, they've combined assets of $49 trillion. To put that in context, that is greater than the GDPs of the United States, Germany, and China combined. So there's absolutely massive financial resources existing within already existing public financial institutions and banks, and that these can be, quite, aggressively redirected towards the achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And these institutions are worldwide. There's still more than 900 public banks in existence around the world, and their numbers are growing daily. But these public banks have very different purposes and mandates. We've already heard a little bit about the different levels and scales of institutions in Brazil. This difference exists around the world. And this also exists at the level of mandates. And there are public banks that have more explicitly public purpose mandates. For example, like the Dutch Water Bank in the Netherlands, that has a mandate that it works, by and for the public sector in terms of reaching water goals, sustainable development goals, social housing, and so on. But where I'm from, Canada, the Canada Infrastructure Bank has a very different mandate, which is explicitly to mobilize private finance for infrastructure, but infrastructure in a way that will generate revenue, which then creates questions around equity and access and so on. So on the one hand, there is these institutions, these 900 institutions with nearly $50 trillion in assets. There's no way we're getting to sustainable development goals without passing through them. But at the second main point I want to make is that to have an impact on the 2030 SDGs at the pace, scale, and on the terms appropriate for green and just transitions, we need to make use of these tools, of these institutions, in a much more explicit sort of public partnership ecosystem. In terms of drawing together the multilaterals, the national development banks, the subnational and even municipal level public banks, and working with existing public enterprises, municipalities, governments, and so on, in what we can talk about as a whole of public sector approach. And at that scale, we're talking absolutely enormous resources that can be repurposed towards green and just transitions. And we know this is needed. There are evident barriers in terms of mobilizing existing private financial resources. There are challenges around holding them to account, greenwashing, but there are also structural barriers that are well known in terms of the fiduciary duties of private financial institutions to ensure certain rates of profitability, or a tendency to be more short-term when we know we need long-term. So what is becoming increasingly evident is that the narrative of profit maximization resolving the sustainable green and just transition goals is not functioning in the way it should, and that we need to have a more policy maximizing approach to addressing the sustainable development. So I was just mentioning that there's good reason to look at public banks as a powerful resource. The Climate Policy Initiative tracks climate finance flows. And for its last report for around year 2020, it shows about $650 billion in trackable climate finance. Public banks provide over half of that themselves. Households around 55 billion. And then the private sector provides, in total, about 280 billion of that. So despite public institutions only having about 1/5 the resources of existing private institutions, they're already investing quantitatively more resources in climate finance than all private sector institutions combined. But public institutions are also advancing the policy and the practice of sustainable development and equitable development. So there are numerous institutions, I'm sure in Brazil, but also around the world. The Nordic Investment Bank, for example, has set a clear green floor. It will no longer finance any fossil fuel-based energy. There are public banks in places like Turkey focused on municipal transformations, who are the cheapest financiers for municipal infrastructure in the country. There are clear mandate-based institutions, something like FMDV in Colombia, that has a strong, clear mandate to be a strategic partner of the national government in regional development. And there are institutions like the Banco Popular in Costa Rica that is taking a lead in developing clear partnerships with the cooperative sector, with the public institutions, universities, and with national parks to ensure that the biodiversity of the country is sustainable. So these are all policy-based interventions that are providing the finance needed, but along very clear sustainability goals. And myself as an academic and a researcher, we're also following up on these and doing research on the collaboration between public banks and provisioning of public water in terms of SDG 6. Just completed a study of that in Europe, looking at the role that public banks are doing in advancing clean, equitable, and sustainable water. And now we're extending that study to the rest of the world. We're active in projects in Latin America, Africa, and Asia now on those collaborations between public banks and public water provisioning. But I think the key point out of that is that while there are really important, practical, concrete collaborations going on, and this is a topic that we'll be raising in Finance and Commons Summit, is that this potential exists there, but more needs to be done. More needs to be done to draw that link between the multilaterals, the national development banks, and the local ones, and more needs to be done in terms of creating clear, transparent, and accountable metrics, and more needs to be done in particular in really digging, substantively into a whole of the public sector, financial ecosystem, and orienting that at the pace, scale, and terms appropriate to green and just transitions, that we can, in fact, realize some of these SDGs in time. There is a caveat. There is nothing essentially good or bad about public banks. Public banks are only as good and as effective as a society makes them. They are contested institutions. And this is really part of the debate in terms of, who should benefit from the resources of these massively powerful financial institutions. We have to be careful in terms of, are they going to be used, substantively to de-risk private investors who have no long-term, role or stake in the realization of SDGs, or are they going to be, in many ways, the catalyst of a sort of cooperative public purpose response, let's say, to the need for green and just transitions? I realize, I don't want to take any more time. I just want to finish by posing, a couple of questions to the forum, questions that we will then pick up again in the Finance and Commons Summit. But, really, how can public collaborations among public banks and the public sector, governments, and state-owned enterprises, and other public sector corporations, and how can they, in collaboration rather than competition, play a fundamental and catalytic role in driving forward green and just transitions? And importantly, I think, what lessons can Brazil's public development banks share with the rest of the world? This is a pressing question for me, coming more from the global north. There is significant advancement in Brazil and across Latin America, in fact. And I think these need to be shared more at an international level to share the lessons from the south to the north. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Vários comentários aqui muito.
We have many comments, okay, very interesting comments, and we're going to shed light about the transparency of all of the indexes, the indicators, and also the mandate of the public banks, okay, when it comes to a sustainable development. And they should be an example for all of the financial organizations and institutions throughout this economic and ecological transformation. And now, in this new scenario, in which we find many challenges, we have the need to create new services, new products, so that we can overcome these challenges. And I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Gustavo Ribeiro. He is part of the fiber program from the GIZ. And so we have the FiBraS. This was born from the cooperation between Brazil and Germany. So what are your perspectives from the GIZ for the development of funding products and services in Brazil? And how can the national development system can offer products and services aligned with the SDGs? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gabriella. I would also like to thank the invitation that was given to me by the ABDE. And we have the German agency here, the GIZ. Thank you, Kezia Braga. Thank you to all of you. We have been working together since 2020. I'm part of a project that is called Sustainable Brazilian Development Goals. My boss could not be here today, unfortunately, due to other commitments. And so regarding the sustainable financial Brazilian initiatives, and we cooperated with the international department, and now we're working with the economic planning department. This is a bilateral program with resources from the Federal Ministry of Germany for economic support done here in Brazil. It's a great pleasure to be here by sharing the perspective that we have been working on, with our partners, and the ABDE is one of our greatest partners, so that we could share the movement that Secretary Ivan has already mentioned at a national level, at an international level. And we have the national development system that is being able to operate with a lot of heterogeneity, with many organizations all over Brazil. And we also have a demand for climate demands to achieve the SDGs, and this is very vast, very broad. The diversity is enormous with many projects, and so the financial development institutions, they have this role not only of channeling all of these resources, but they are facing the challenge on how to deal with this interface between international requests mentioned by Secretary Ivan, and they are huge obstacles for you to get resources from the Green Fund. And we have highly detailed products. We have safeguards that are very strict and harsh. And there is also a standard, a compliance standard that is extremely sophisticated, that requires a lot of time. And so a project is going to take 1.5 years with a lot of resources, with many consultants, okay? And this is a process that maybe we need to accelerate so that we can achieve the SDGs. So this aspect, and also thinking about the role of the DFIs, and focusing on the regional aspect, and that they don't have the minimum safeguards, and this presents a huge challenge. And we need a capacity building of the DFIs, and they're going to have a very slow process. Maybe not a slow process, but we have to work together, because many of the standards that are required, they required data. And so, for example, we have the central bank that supplies them to us, but many of these data are going to have to be collected internally within a financial organization, and most of them, they're going to have to be shared with us by the users. And you're going to have to analyze not only the financial aspects, okay, which was standard in our sector, but environmental and social aspects as well. So this challenge of being able to translate all of the prerequisites and all of the safeguards in such a diverse scenario is difficult. For example, electricity for all of the electrical cars in Brazil, or fostering a way so that people can buy more electrical cars. Okay, this is important. This is going to help with the climate change impacts. But if you're going to foster electrical cars in a region that they don't have a chain to repurpose or recycle the batteries, how are you going to do that? Because you can pollute the soil. So the standards and the international recommendations, they have been designed for an economy that is highly developed and that has some presuppositions.
And the challenges of managing risk in the evaluation of projects that will have to go in, and if there's a mobilization of international finances for specific themes, and you have the complexity with the user at the front, which will have to supply you data, the financial institution will have to have the capability and the experience of processes, and to make this risk management and to report for these international funds. And they will demand a monitoring of the impacts and the respect of safeguards. So these are some points that we see as challenges. And something I find very interesting is to think about the diversity of the national system for development, very well defined. You have 700 billion in funds and some 100 billion, 40 employees, and up to 2,000 employees. So these differences, the heterogeneity, you can have a complexity, how the ABDE and the national development system can deal with these challenges. So these complexities, due to the regional differences of Brazil, be it physical, types of project, risk, social vulnerabilities, infrastructure investments in cities have a specific issue. So this heterogeneity, you can have difficulties of standardizing the processes. You might have a bigger need for automatization, and you're leaving smaller institutions outside this movement, and they have greater ability of penetration in the groups, social groups and regions that are most vulnerable, so they're essential to make this fair transition. How can you work with institutions that have to do this report, maybe simplified, but with the capability which is not from the BNDES or from Caixa? Besides that, the other side of the coin is that this heterogeneous aspect has a lot of capability of innovation, the ability to bring new financial products to approve, be it regionally or depending on the size of the institution. Okay, my time is ending, so I'll go to my finishing comments. But talking about the ABDE, it has this fundamental role of coordination. It knows very well the system. This is not a simple task. It's not a knowledge that is easily available, and it has a role, as you can see. Many international corporations like GIZ, UN, various agencies of the UN, the French Corporation Agency, CAF, and sometimes GIZ, they come with similar mandates, and you can have overposition. So you have to have articulation between these institutions and have to channel these international resources where the effort is more effective. So for example, capacity building, strategies of capability building, independently of the size of institutions, maybe you could mobilize some institutions that are more advanced in specific agendas, or already operate with the Green Climate Fund. Just think of some examples where you have a program where smaller institutions can access those resources. So these strategies had to be anchored in an institution knows the system and knows how to get around. So that is one of the roles of the ABDE. And another one, just to close, is the cost of transaction, which is one of the greatest challenges within these institutions, and what that means for the issue of a fair transition. Because the greater the number of reports you have to operate a resource within a program where Caixa, BNDES work at the front, and that they could go down this chain of financial institutions, the guy at the end will have to report so much information that he might not have. The bank will have to do the management of that risk and scale. So this risk in a small operation that we have to promote to have greater social impact, it doesn't accept an analysis of months by a technical specialist that is focused there. So this is an interesting challenge. And to close, from a positive perspective, the ABDE with the digitalization strategy has a great potential, especially the exchange between the institutions that are part of the national development system. Thank you, Gustavo. It's very complex, many challenges in such an unequal country with scenarios that are so different socially and economically. And I would take this cue to introduce our last, Mr. Jean Rodrigues Benevides, Executive Director from Caixa for Sustainability. This bank, this is in many Brazilians' lives. I would like that you share your experience, bringing the importance of the impact of the projects in the social environmental area and the work of Caixa in terms of social economic inclusion, promoting, like the director of Sicobi said, which a very good term, which is the financial citizenship, which is a very interesting term. So thank you, Gabriella. Thank you, ABDE, for the invitation. I think Caixa, everybody knows, we have a history in terms of financial inclusion and the fight against inequality. But we were created by Emperor Dom Pedro II. And you know why it was created? We were created to develop the savings so that the slaves could save up their money, buy their freedom, and also and like a small microcredit so that they could have ways of generating income and to buy their freedom. So we already were born with the social DNA included and in a strong moment of Brazil. And we talk, and it's this theme of social inclusion, financial inclusion. We have a legitimacy to speak about that. We have the greatest number of clients of the Brazilian system. We have over 150 million clients, and we have the greatest base of low income. 122 million have their income up to 10,000 reais. So we have a lot to develop, and we need a lot of cooperation to do that, to get to there. So we can say that financial inclusion promotes freedom and also empowerment for individuals. It's a theme that has a lot to do when we're talking about transforming a mission and plan in actions, and to align this with what is the 2030 agenda, more sustainable development. So when we talk about this theme, it has such a multidimensional aspect that it goes through many SDGs. The opening panel talked about that. A lot of these indicators, we had a setback, and we have to do a lot of things. We have a country, many indicators, over 30 million people in extreme poverty, famine. So we feel with the impetus of doing more, working more, of aligning what Ivan talked about, the climate agenda with climate justice, because we know the vulnerability of this public that is in our monthly in our channels. So I'd like to highlight about social inclusion in three focuses. The first is the availability of financial resources, then citizen services, and then to promote access. Access is fundamental with a country the size of Brazil. So the first is the financial resources. The first is the inclusion, to guarantee financial resources from public policies, because many times these resources guarantees dignity. It's the minimum for them to survive. especially from the federal government, but also from state government that have to do and go to Caixa so they can have these. This is the basic we have to talk about inclusion and combating inequality and considering especially the vulnerability. What we're talking about changing from plans to action. In this year, we went over 32 billion reais paid monthly. That's for the dignity of people, but it moves the local economy. This is very important. And besides that, other also of scholarships, green scholarships, unemployment benefits, many other things that we do. Caixa, most of our development banks that don't have the capillarity that we have, and we can be a partner so that we can share all of these channels, these solutions that we built and put forth these solutions, having seen what happened during the pandemic. And the second focus, when we talk about the services for citizenship, we talk about the multiple actions of the bank with the characteristics of the bank to create solutions that allows Brazilians the acquisitions of goods and services, because that guarantees part of that dignity, basic sanitation, to make the solutions reaching the end, that we are present in all the municipalities, financing for education as a tool of freedom and access to a better quality of life, of jobs, income. It's essential that a bank be doing these to make viable education. And I think everyone knows the main action of Caixa is the access to homes, to having their own homes. So in these 6 months, we've financed over 300,000 units, 6 million to home units in the last 10 years. So this public is our client of projects, of long-term contracts, and it is available for cooperation actions, be it from the government or development banks that are here. We have created solutions for women in housing financing. When she's pregnant, we allow her to pay only 75% for 6 months. Up to 90 days with the baby, we give her some period for, if she loses her job, she can have 6 months to repay her finance. We give her a grace period. So when we talk about inclusion and access to basic services, they have this obligation of thinking about these mechanisms. And finally, when we're talking about better distribution of income and inclusion, we have to talk about how to give access to that population. We have to think of this access not only physical. We are the bank with the greatest number of agencies or branches. We have 26,000, over 4,700 branches, and we also emergency aspects for trucks. When there was this tragedy with the Yanomamis, in less than a week we got with trucks there so that we could do the payment of the scholarships to those people or grants, agencies that were in containers. We created as a public bank solutions so that we could get the service to these population, and to think about how we can get we have mobile banks. We have banks that are in the ships and they go through the Solimões and the Marajó, taking dignity to these people. I was last month there, and it's incredible to hear what the employees say about what the demands are. And you avoid them having to travel 9 hours to take money from another. They'll spend they can take that, get that money within their location. So when we think about sustainable development agendas, we have to see this situation and also how much is still lacking in Brazil. And also we have to think about the digital movement. We cannot have these people excluded from this digital movement. So we created a solution that during the pandemic, which is the Caixa thing, and it's easier to communicate like in the WhatsApp, services that are made easier, but we also saw that not everyone is ready to make use of the digital movement. In 2023, we had to give millions of debit cards, even having QR codes, making solutions that they could take their money. No, they didn't have internet, and they couldn't use it, so they needed cards. So digital literacy is fundamental if we want these public policies through digital access might arrive to this public. Another thing, I don't know if you know it, Caixa responds for 20% of all the Pix transactions in Brazil, and 80% of these are done in the Caixa Tem, and they use a lot of Pix. It's a means, it's because you don't pay a tariff, but in those transactions that they do, so it's a public that is fundamental in this digital literacy. We have to take financial literacy so that they do not fall in scams and cybersecurity problems that we're seeing. It's a strategic agenda, and we talk with the open finance movement. We have a lot to do in order to increase this financial inclusion. We can do integration of financial data of this public. We can do financial education that is more personalized for this public and knowing more about it. And we will do solutions that are more inclusive for this public. So the movement that is coming from the open finance will be very positive. And we have to work in a greater perspective as a director in Caixa, as a sustainability. We have to think it's the promotion of financial health of this public. Financial health is a very ample concept, not only of this, to know how to move, access to credit, microfinances, and what Gabriella talked about, financial citizenship, so they avoid scams and problems, and so they might have access and quality of life from what a public bank can supply to them. So we bring this as something to this debate, to this agenda of the SDGs that are crucial if we want to think about Brazil being in a level, a case, an example for other countries as fulfilling the 2030 agenda through means and solutions that reach this public that still need a lot the public banks, as are most of those here in this audience. Thank you, and be available. We're available for this debate. Thank you, Jean Rodrigues. We could be here for a long time hearing the experience of Caixa. We're going to end this first panel. We selected a question sent by the public by Mr. Tanaka. I don't know if he's still here. That summarizes very well. I don't know if he sent it through the internet. We have our virtual public as well. And an issue that's an important issue in this line of implementing the agendas and put at the local level. So how can we advance in the monitoring of public of missions of like the ABDA 2030 and follow it through actions with indicators and measurable metrics? We have to measure all of these. I will give the word to all three of them. I don't know if we can do that virtually for a brief 40-second intervention. Let's start with Mr. Ivan.
Thank you very much. This index agenda is critical, not only for Mexico, and Mr. Gustavo mentioned that well, and how this is interesting for the entire Brazilian development system, our connection with national and international banks, and now extrapolating this and bringing this to my agenda at the international scenario. What exactly is climate? how the multilateral groups, they have a different methodology of how much they are sending this to climate change. So 35% of my portfolio is going to be invested in mitigation, in diminishing the climate changes, but not everything is black or white. There is a gray area. When we discuss now the World Bank, at the World Bank, the main issue, the World Bank is going to present a new mission, a mission that is based on everything that it has done since its very beginning, reducing extreme poverty, in improving people's life quality. And a third element that was mentioned and added in June was to have a good planet on which we can live. And what is a good for living planet? And then when you analyze the scorecard, the understanding of what is a planet good to live on is different. One country A and country B, they have different ideas. And so the rich countries, they analyze the scorecard to see if the bank is assessing everything, if they are meeting its mission based on indicators, and they connected this to the emission of CO2. So that is a specific vulnerability issue regarding climate change. And for us in Brazil, a livable planet is different. The forest is there, but people don't have any basic sanitation. We cannot think about a livable planet if on the other side of the river we can see the sewer flowing on the surface. So you go to the specific part of the project, but then at the World Bank we say, where is the World Bank aiming to go to? In these ongoing negotiations in Washington, D.C., what are going to be the indicators for a livable planet? This is going to tell the World Bank how much they are going to invest here or there. Maybe in Belém, the World Bank is going to need a special mitigation index or indicator. And in the end, we're telling people where our money is going to. And this is essential and strategic. So it connects with you guys there, the banks that are implementing the projects, but it also connected to us. For example, governance of the World Bank, because this is the World Bank is core for the financial world. And so the World Bank has like a magnet force or strength that attracts the other banks. We are reviewing our strategies. We have an Asian bank. Just to bear this in mind, there are more discussions than certainties, but behind each indicator, there is a lot of interest, and Brazil has to be 100% clear. What are our interests? What are our objectives? What are our goals? What is more convenient for us? What is closer to our interest, domestically speaking and internationally speaking? Thank you. Perfect. I would like to pass the floor to Professor Thomas Marois. I don't know if we have time to have his participation. The organizers, do we still have time? So Professor Thomas Marois, from an academic perspective regarding the monitoring that is so important, what should we do? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Great question. That's actually the topic of one of the presentations we'll be doing in Cartagena with the FIX. With the French Development Agency, we did some research last summer. And very quickly, the results were that there is really no common framework of assessment or metrics or indicators, but this is needed. But that the type of indicators that are required are what we call metrics that matter. So very simple, but clear, but co-created indicators of what success is in a given community. And the reason for that is because we know that if you impose external metrics or indicators, that often create conflict. And so what you need to do is work between the development finance institution and the communities to create ones that are co-created, that are simple, that don't become a burden for either the bank or the community, that sets out a clear pathway to what success looks like, what sustainability looks like, what equitable development looks like, have those agreed upon, and then those become implemented at the beginning, middle, and at the end of the project. And that's really what I think we need to move more towards. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Já passando aqui para o senhor Gustavo, num ponto de vista...
Now, passing the floor to Mr. Gustavo regarding cooperation, because within the cooperation, monitoring has a higher role, right? A more important role. I'm not going to be very fast. The topics are very interesting and the contributions are very interesting, and I'm anxious to listen to the gentleman from Caixa Econômica Federal. So cooperation is always marked by many, many indicators. This is something that we coexist with, and like all of the public funds in donations, they need to have this monitoring. We have indicators. What is the origin of the money? What is the origin of the funds? And the complexity. There is a commitment between the sophistication level, the technical level, with the monitoring costs. So to what extent the examples that Caixa Econômica shared with us, and they are very, very effective. Access to credit, and maybe we should think about the most simple first to the simplest first to the most complicated. So what should we do to say, these funds have generated a benefit to this community? So we need to analyze the taxonomy, how complex this is, and we also have to try to qualify these assets and funds and how it was used. We always have to think about this balance. As a financial institution, we have to create these instruments and these indicators. Well, there are many banks here, and with the support of the IDB, our framework is based on sustainable action. So which impacts do you want to generate? So if I am funding a solar power project, so is it emitting CO2? Am I, how many cubic meters of sewage is being treated? Am I diminishing the CO2 emissions? How many people benefited from this project? So all of the organizations have these challenges. We are concluding this work now. We go through external auditing so that we can be sure that these funds are being used correctly. And regarding the emissions, everybody's creating their CO2 inventories, how much they are emitting, the emissions that have been funding. We are analyzing our portfolios because the World Bank expects us to do that. And regarding the SDGs, Caixa created a partnership with the Sustainable City Institute that has an index that measures the sustainability of the cities, and they can measure each of the SDGs in these cities. So we're going to work with this Sustainable City Institute, and we're going to use their tools. We're going to analyze the municipality before the investment, during the investment, and after the investment. So what is the funding from Caixa Econômica generating that municipality? What have we been financing? And we're trying to help the municipalities, and they have to be able to see themselves, compare themselves to other municipalities so that they can achieve the 2030 SDGs. So we started doing this work, and we require a lot of innovation, and this is a huge challenge. We need to create other indicators, 100 indicators. We have to use local databases, state databases, national databases to see if they are achieving the SDGs. Perfect. And with these last remarks, we're going to wrap up this panel. And this panel is just an appetizer to show you how the following days are going to be. Thank you, Professor Thomas, for being here today. Thank you, ABDE. Thank you to all of the panelists. And let's have a wonderful event. Thank you very much.